on quorum today, so thank you. So we're a little short on quorum today. Of course, we have to get to seven, and there's only four of us here today, so we need to hold off on any action items until quorum gets here, if it happens today. Otherwise, we can set that over. But of course, we can still go through the updates and ask any questions. And do we have somebody taking minutes today?
I can do it from right here.
Thank you, Judge. Okay, so Ellen, I didn't ask when we talked, but did you have an icebreaker that we could potentially do today? You're on mute.
Yes. Yes, I can always come up with an icebreaker. Absolutely. A fun spring icebreaker. Just I would say your name and something you're really looking forward to as we move toward the official launch of spring, even though we've had some false springs here. And we can go over to Matt. He's at the top, so I'll go to him first.
Hi, I'm Matt Kroll. I'm the law enforcement side of things. I've been a committee member since last May. Something I'm looking forward to is playoff season for high school basketball. Our high school made it division champions, and we start playoffs on Friday.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Matt, you want to call on somebody?
I'll pass it off to the judge.
All right, I'm Megan Chico, and I'm looking forward to gardening. I'd love to do that this spring. I will pass it to Alex. Oh, did we lose her?
Alexis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi. Can you
Sorry.
hear me okay?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Good morning. My name is Alexis Amarelli. I am a person with lived experience, but right now I am also serving the state of Oregon as the foster care ombudsman in the governor's advocacy office. I am a guest in this space. I'm not a member of the commission, but I'm very grateful to be here and to share space with everyone and hear conversations and see how I can be most helpful. Something I'm looking forward to for spring, my partner and I are celebrating 13 years of marriage, and we always book it looks like someone started the meeting in Teams, Ellen. We are heading to the beach, so it looks like there's going to be some sunshine when we're going to go there, and it's this weekend. So I guess that's spring, maybe, but that's all I can think about is I get 2 days of vacation time. I'm super excited. So, and I will pass it to Casey.
Have a
Good
great
morning,
trip.
everybody. Good morning. Like everybody else, I'm looking forward to outside activities come springtime. Yeah, usually I handle this overcast weather pretty well in Oregon. I'm a lifelong Oregonian, but I think like most of us, towards the end of it, I'm just ready for some summer. And I think all of our best city events, we have concerts in the park. Really enjoy those, and so love to be outside. Other thing that I'm looking forward to, just to mention, is my wife is going overseas for a whole month, visiting Azerbaijan and some other countries. And so going to be just me and my daughter for a month. So I'm looking forward to that, like personal, one-on-one time with her for a month straight, see how that goes. So I'll send it over to next on my list is Adam.
Hey, good morning, folks. Adam Rudakowski, you see him pronouns. I'm the director of foster care at Greater Oregon Behavioral Health, and chair of the Governor's System of Care Advisory Council. And I'm just here to hang and listen and make sure I have a pulse on Tristan mostly. No, just I just like to know what y'all are talking about. It's important work, and child welfare is the everyday what I do, and try to support youth and families. So, that's why I'm here. Yeah, I think similar to others. I'm in my not work life. I do a fair bit of farming. I grew up on a farm. My folks still farm, have some land that it's that we work and plant, and like it's just cool to be able to look back at the end of the day and see the progress of the work that you accomplished, which I feel like in this field sometimes we don't get to see that like seed develop for years and decades sometimes. The change that we try to work for, and so that immediate gratification at the end of the day, looking behind you and see where you came from and where you got, is nice for me. So And I'll turn it over to Tristan since I jabbed him a little bit.
No worries. I'm Tristan Fernandez. I'm a policy analyst at ODHS Child Welfare with a focus on legislation. I'm here today to give a legislative update later in the agenda. And I think the thing I'm most looking forward to actually also pairs with that is that I'm looking forward to the end of session because spring does mark the end of legislative short session and all the chaos that comes with it. And I guess I will pass it on to Alicia is the next person on my list.
Richard? Alicia Richard, this one? I'll go.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, trying to get back off mute.
I'm Alicia Richard. I'm one of the members here and person with lived experience, and I'm in long-term recovery. I also have kids that I have 3 high schoolers that are that just made state for wrestling, and so that's what I am looking forward to going to watching them wrestle this weekend. It's kind of nerve-wracking a little bit, but just really proud of them and looking forward to seeing how they do. Let's see. How about the other Alicia?
Hi, I'm Alicia Brigmore. I'm just observing. Happy to be home here in Oregon, hopefully to see some changes in our foster care program, and hopefully that no other child has to go through what mine have or to be located. Again, we've all went over this already. It's almost a year later. So I'm just kind of following up and seeing where the commission is today.
Malik or Donna?
I'll go. Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Haney. I use she, her pronouns. I am the assistant manager in our foster care program. And it sounds like we're talking about what we're looking forward to with spring. And I'm looking forward to going to visit my youngest child who goes to school in the Midwest in Kansas City. So I'll be spending a few days over there here in a week or so. And Malik.
Malik Alexander, he and pronouns. I'm also a commissioner. What am I excited for spring? I personally love this weather. I love it rainy. It was like over the weekend, I was like, oh, it's so nice. But my friend's really into whitewater kayaking, and so has convinced me that when once it starts getting warm, that he's going to drag me out. So, kind of excited to get into that. Could be my new hobby. I don't know. But yeah. Um, and then I guess Ellen, if you didn't go yet.
If you did go, I think the last person to go is, or wait, no, Ellen, you didn't go. You just started the
Yeah, no,
icebreaker.
I didn't go. And then Matt, I think is the last person. Yeah, Ellen Bell, and I'm the coordinator for the commission. And I'm really looking forward to similar. I haven't had a chance to do any gardening down here yet, and so I am looking forward to that. The soil is different than it is up near Astoria, so I have to figure that piece out. And that's kind of exciting. But the other thing is I do want to get out on the river this year and just go and do a little bit more camping than I did last year. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And I'll give it to Matt.
Hello, good morning, Commission. My name is Matt. I'm the owner of Miller's Barbecue in Salem, located in the DHS office in Northeast Salem. And I'm looking forward to serving more people and working with the foster community some more. So, yeah.
Matt, I'm taking notes. Can you tell me your last name?
Yeah, Matt Miller.
Thanks.
And then the final person looks like we've got Stacy. And before Stacy gives us her little icebreaker, she's actually going to be our presenter here to start us off. She's at the 11:45 presentation on housing availability and processes for youth exiting care. Of course, this is kind of a part 2 for her. So this is, if you looked at the agenda, this is going to be focused on the role the commission can play and discussion follow-up. So welcome, Stacy, if you want to share with us what you're looking forward to in spring, and then go ahead and jump into it.
Stacy Mailer, she, her, and I'm with DHS's Family First team, and looking forward to spring. I'm not thinking about anything other than my dog would really like it to be sunny. She really likes going out and like sitting in the sun, and you'll see her like just close her eyes and face up to the sun, which is pretty cute. So I'm looking forward to that for her. And I didn't prepare a presentation because I presented last time, but I really came to talk about questions from last time, thoughts, and kind of just more having a dialogue about roles in which you're wondering if you could play, if there are connections or ideas that I can share. I'm happy to do that, or other follow-up that I can do that I can also bring back more. I'm happy to do that kind of stuff. I love being able to talk about housing, especially when it comes to our young people, because I worked in teen world so long, and I think that there's a lot of growth that we still need to do to provide young people with everything they need, as they become young adults and transition out of care and all that. Just to recap really quickly, kind of what we talked about last time is I went through the different options that we have for young adults. So talking through that we have some transitional living programs. There's certainly not enough, because you're talking about there are a few under youth transitions, which is our independent living program that supports young people gain those skills. And then there's another few that are under our treatment services. So they open up like kind of our behavior rehabilitation services programs, but they also have a few transitional living programs. And one of the hardships there is those don't cover all the state. So, people don't necessarily want to move to Portland because they want to try a transitional living program. So, there's a big gap in some parts of the state where those don't occur. And then there are things like the subsidy and Chafee housing programs that are, financial supports, but are kind of barrier heavy. But the good thing is they can occur in any part of the state. And then lastly, really the other big bucket of options are the foster youth independence vouchers. And at this point, we are still trying to grow those. We would like every public housing authority in the state to take those on. But it's been a little bit of a barrier. Some PHAs are reluctant to take them on, but also some child welfare struggles a little bit because they try to figure out how we can provide the supportive services for everyone who's eligible for those young people. Like there are people that ILP can provide that supportive services, but that doesn't, that's not for everybody. So like those are the kind of the biggest buckets of what we are offering now. And again, I think all could use expansion, all can use additional supports. And so, I don't know if people have questions about those or any thoughts that could kind of start this conversation. Go for it.
Do you feel like the legislature is supportive of these programs for the older teens that are aging out?
I can't say that I've been in the world of the legislature that long. So this last, kind of enough has given me some time in my face. Oh, there it goes. That it's distracting when I see like myself making a very strange face at y'all. But so I will say that like, as a worker and as a supervisor, did I get to spend a lot of time in that? No. And in this role, though, I've been able to spend more time in that. And I would say it's mixed. There's not, because again, they're in different buckets and there's different places. And so, certainly when our treatment services is in front of the legislature, it's a lot about some of the other, things that they're doing, because, they're doing the behavior rehabilitative services, and that is that's a sticky subject because we really don't want that many people in congregate care. These fall under the same team but are a separate program. And then when you have stuff like subsidy and Chafee, that is so federally funded. that we lack a little bit of flexibility there. So I certainly hear things here and there where it's clear that there is some interest. Like, OHDS had a couple pilots, in that were interesting, that we could have probably done a better job of, them connecting with the, DHS locally to make sure that our young people took advantage of it, because they had like the Ray program and one other that I'm blanking on the name, Yeehaw, that could have benefited some of our young people. So there are different things that are being done. I would just say it's really challenging because they come from so many different areas. The one thing I think would be lovely for just is to figure out how we can talk through how to fund more for the supportive services for the FYI vouchers, because like I said, if you have some young people that are eligible for IOP, they have that supportive service, but the voucher is broader than that. The voucher will take people that aren't eligible for IOP. So they were in foster care when they were 10 and now they're 19 and homeless. We could serve that person with an FYI voucher. The problem is, where's the funding coming from? And so, making sure that we have things like that, to me, those should be part of the conversation. Not that there aren't other things, but that's kind of an very obvious one that, hey, this is a great housing option, and yet we haven't fully capitalized on it. We're doing it, but we haven't fully capitalized on it.
Do you think there's anything that we could do at the state level to make the Chafee burdens a little bit easier for kids to handle, or is it so federalized that we can't really fix any of that?
Well, the Chafee part is hard because it's a couple different things. There's obviously the Chafee educational, and Chafee housing, and so that takes a lot of weeding through. And we do the Chafee one is limited by funding. So like when you look at both Chafee housing and the Chafee educational, they're both limited. So if somebody, did our subsidy housing program, that could possibly go on for 3 years. Whereas if somebody did our Chafee housing, that's 1 year. So if you have a young person that really wants to be independent and not, have a judge and a caseworker oversee them on a basis, like Chafee housing isn't equivalent. You know what I mean? It like subsidy can go on 3 years, but they still have the judge oversight and all that. Versus Chafee housing can be kind of a maximum of 1 year based on the funding total there. And the same thing with, there's also some financial limitations to the Chafee educational money, because you're talking about 5,000. When you think about that, that's a pretty small sum. In combined, if somebody does a really good job of filling out other applications for financial aid and those kind of things, it's still helpful, very helpful. But it's really not enough to do all you would like it to do. And then there's some of the rigidness because, like Chafee housing requires you to have left care and custody at 18 or later. So, but we have a number of young people that leave maybe at 17. And so they wouldn't be eligible for any of that housing funding later. They'd still be eligible for the Chafee educational money and still be eligible for FYI vouchers. And so there's a couple things going on there. There's, always we could use for a little bit more funding for that. But then there's also so many different eligibilities that makes it hard for people to navigate, both the people inside the system that are at DHS, but also for like homeless youth providers and stuff. It's very confusing. There's a lot of different, pieces of the eligibility.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was thinking, listening to you talk. You're very well trained. How ubiquitous is the training in the local branches? It's a lot of them don't know all of this.
Yeah, and there's good reasons why they don't know all of it. I mean, in lots of places in the state, people aren't available even just to be dedicated teen workers. Maybe they're serving one teen on their caseload, or maybe they're serving 2 or 3 teens on their caseload, and the rest of their caseload is younger children. And there are so many things that are different for young adults. Like in the community and in our, and kind of in what placements are available. So like even when young people can start consenting to their own medical care, well, it's always weird because it really conflicts with what we say. We say that we're signing off on that. Well, no, they can, if they choose to. I mean, when a young person, they can consent to the release of their medical. Well, we're trying to make medical decisions and we don't even have access to the records. and our rules haven't really kept up with that, I will say. Not that we don't allow them to do that stuff, but it's confusing if you even look at our rules to do stuff like that. So that stuff it gets pretty confusing. And again, it's hard to get that level of support because our agency is so much about safety and and permanency, and those both look really different for older kids. So permanency may not mean adoption anymore. It may not mean reunification, but it does mean permanent connections. And do we offer enough supports to make sure that those connections are happening and maintained? Do we do enough to do that? Because it's not that straightforward path, but it's really making sure that there are people around them that they stay connected with in many ways. And safety. Sometimes our young adults, when we're looking at safety anymore, it is really sometimes about choices they make, because all young people experiment with things and are trying to live their own lives. And so sometimes the safety, involves, kind of what they do and don't do at that stage in life. And testing out their boundaries as young adults. And so sometimes the safety looks really different, but there are still our safety risks. And so again, we're looking at some of the same things, but we need to figure out how to look at them in different ways for young people and stop pretending like they're 8, because they're not.
So Stacy, following up on what the judge just asked in your answer, how do we fix that? I mean, you said, it's no surprise that not all caseworkers don't know. But how do we create a system that is more formal? For instance, when we have CRB, citizen review boards, they're checking in whether ILP has discussed, you know, credit checks, things like that with the children. How do we ensure that, housing options and educational options are actually being addressed with kids? To that vein, whether the agency thinks that's kind of their responsibility or if they want to leave that to attorneys, because I certainly know attorneys that rep kids don't always know all of the information either. But I agree, many caseworkers don't always know the information, and sometimes we get them the information when they're already graduating high school, and they haven't been working towards trying to go to college. And so I guess, yeah, my question is like, how do we fix that? How do we formalize that and make it to where it's just something that happens when a kid turns 15 or turns 16, that we go over and say, here's a long-term plan for educational options, for housing options, and just ensure that happens?
Well, I do think we do need to do a better job of talking about like transition planning and how we support people through that. So we all know that we're supposed to do transition plans for young people. And really what's important is not that piece of paper that we're doing, even though that's required. And really, whether IOP is doing it or DHS is doing it, it doesn't matter. But like starting that conversation early and often, and like being able to adapt it for different young people, is really important. So figuring out how we bring their teams to the table in a respectful way. So for a transition plan, it's the young person's choice who comes to the table. But at some point, we also need to say to them, hey, if we're still going to have to meet with other adults in your life and see how they can support you. So if you want to have a meeting with us, or you want to come to the table for 15 minutes and then we'll do some talking, or just figuring out how to adapt it in different ways to get to engage people in that conversation. And so like that's a part of a piece, because I think everyone needs to have check-ins in regards to that. Like, who are those people in your life that are going to support you? And I don't think we do a great job of training our meeting facilitators to do that, because like whether it's your coworker that's helping with the meeting, or you're doing it yourself, or you're having a meeting facilitator, you want somebody who is able to engage in that conversation, and bring as many people to the table as possible. I think we should also be doing kind of localized trainings about what's available, because again, I wouldn't want to do a training for the state and say like, this is what's available. Because the reality is I don't want to spend, if we're doing an hour training, I don't want to spend a half hour talking about transitional living programs that none are within a 3-hour drive of you. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But if we were able to do some of those localized trainings about some of those things, I think it would be helpful. Like, not that they don't need to know at all about those, But if they don't have any connection with, Portland or Eugene or wherever that place is, I don't want to focus on that. I want to like give them a brief overview, but then kind of tell them what's available. And I think that that's a training that needs to be offered to everyone in that person's life that wants to go. So the young person can go, the foster parent, resource parent can go, attorney can go if they wanted to go. Like that is how I see that working. Having people coming from the different, agencies or programs, somebody can represent those, talk about those different things and talk about what's available so that like they're at least thinking about what the possibilities are. And no one in that room is thinking it's that person's job, because it's not. It's all of your job. Like, and I don't mean job as job. I just mean like it's all of your roles. And often, so if there's an aunt involved that, doesn't feel like they can be resource parent or doesn't want to be resource parent, but really wants to be aunt, and the young person needs to know that they're going to help them. Like they've already started collecting stuff for their first apartment, or like whichever role that they can play. But you're not thinking that if you're not brought into the conversation. So if somebody's thinking, oh, DHS has got that covered or ILP's got that covered, no, they don't. They're a piece that can help, but they're just a piece. And so to me, that's what's important, is bring everyone to the conversation so no one thinks that there's just somebody else covering this. Because again, I don't think that that's possible. I think, that they need, each member of the team that is going to help and support in different ways. It may be based on like the particular connection or skill that they have, but they're each available. And if they don't know those things, it's harder for them to have a conversation about it. It's hard for them to say, like, hey, did you, think about this? I know you really want an apartment, but we've talked about all these reasons why maybe you're not ready yet. Maybe like, we should look at one of those transitional living programs. Would they let us visit? Will they, do a virtual tour? How could we do that? Could I do that with you? Like, I want people having that conversation again and again. It looks like we got a hand raised.
I
Yeah,
did see that Alicia had their hand
Alicia
up,
did too.
and
Yeah.
so I wanted to
Yep.
just circle that back to Alicia first, because I know you were.
I was just thinking in real time, like if say I have a family in Clackamas County, where do I go? I go to the worker? Or what if they're already been out of foster care and their case is technically closed and they're still in that 18 to 24, whatever it was, 18 to 21? Who do you contact to get like help if they're houseless and they need help? Who would
So
you call?
and so, some of the problem I think is happens because it's a little different, but you can always start with DHS because they, if you want, because they can say who the ILP provider is, or send you and if they're kind of eligible for a case through DHS or
Right.
straight just through ILP. So that's always an option. The other piece of, if they're homeless, there's usually also coordinated entry that they would want you to go through, to look at housing options. So in Clackamas, for instance, there is a person at DHS that takes the referrals for the FYI vouchers, but they usually go through their coordinated entry first, which is their Clackamas housing line. And
Chaw line?
so what?
The chaw line, I think they call that.
Yes.
Okay.
I was like, I could not
Yeah,
think
so
of the
it's
full
what you said.
acronym
It's just
to describe.
abbreviated. Yep. So it's different
So
everywhere.
yeah, and so like that's hard, but I will say, like, for somebody that you believe to be eligible for ILP, you're always able to call the hotline, and they should
What's
be
the
able to
hotline?
get that open. But like, if they already know the ILP provider, they can just connect with the ILP provider directly if they want to. They can help them get it opened up for ILP services. So that gets a little bit more confusing in, say, Multnomah, because now there's a bunch of ILP providers or several ILP providers. But in say Washington County and Clackamas County, it's been youth villages for years. So people are able to reach out to youth villages and should be able to get that started. They should be aware of their coordinated entry lines. They should be aware of, the FYI stuff. But again, if they're not, to me, that's where there's a gap. But they are at least linked up. So any of the ILP programs are linked up to our ILP Central. So our ILP Central could also, kind of help them figure out some of that. Like they'll reach out to me and say like, hey, I got a call from somebody, in such and such a place. like the last time I checked, there was no vouchers there. Has anything changed, Stacy? Like that kind of thing. But again, that is not as smooth as it should be, but like we're working on it for sure.
So I guess I feel maybe this is what I'm sensing, but I don't know if other people are sensing it, that it's really confusing about how do you even access it. To me, it seems like and maybe that's why they're not accessing it, because it seems like there isn't really a direct, or I'm not asking the right question. So like ILP Central, what does that mean? Is that like
Sorry.
a
So
phone
our
number?
IOP Central is the DHS's staff that
Okay,
deals with that. So they do all the billing and all the, and all those different things for all of the IOP programs statewide.
gotcha. And is that something that a person could, like a youth could access? Is there a phone number or a website?
Usually they do have their public facing website, and I don't know how many youth connect with them directly. They can, usually it's through email because that hits the whole team,
Right.
and that way they can kind of figure out who's going to respond.
Okay.
I will say when I've normally had young people connect, it's because say they wanted like a ward of the court letter, which is helpful for like purposes of financial aid.
Right.
So they can connect through that. But yes, that is definitely a place they can go, they can go directly. It's again not the most friendly because it's, one email line, and they kind of have to wait and hope for a response. And I don't know that they have a central phone line that they use.
Okay.
I know that a few years ago we added a whole bunch of ICWA specialists, and now they're like regional specialists that are able to work on harder cases. You think it would help if there were 5 or 6 people like you around the state that had assigned to different regions? So if there was a hard teen or a hard ILP case,
I mean, I think, I am certainly biased because, I think housing is such a big deal. And certainly no one thinks of us as a housing agency. Yet we house lots of people and we work with families that lack housing or lack stable housing on a regular basis. So I certainly think that some kind of specialization in housing would be beneficial, whether that was DHS staff or contracted partners or somebody that kind of brings some of those pieces together. I definitely think that would be incredibly valuable. I think both for our families and for our young adults, because housing is a huge barrier for people, and it impacts in so many different ways because it impacts their connections, because as you move around you lose those connections. It makes it harder to continue. It impacts where you're going to school because that may be harder to continue a program that you liked because of the distance. It impact, what I mean? It just one thing after another. You lose, if you're moving a lot, you tend to lose things that you hope to keep versus staying in the same place. There are so many different losses that come with moving around a lot, in crisis situations, that housing, I just think, is such a big deal for connection and permanency, that I absolutely wish that we had some more specialty there, and could support anyone working with us, with more housing supports for sure.
Um, thank you for sharing. So this is like my passion is working specifically with like houseless youth, and kind of that's what my day job is. So I love would probably gonna send you an email to talk offline about some stuff. But like what you
Absolutely.
kind of shared in kind of an agreement, and what I have found is that like there people just don't seem to have the information or the knowledge. And so like my work specifically is like we go and present to DHS like quarterly about like the housing options, like New Avenues is one of the people that holds some of the transitional housing options, obviously. But like I have checked in with young people and checked in with caseworkers that there's just not like a centralized place where all of the information about all of the providers, about all of the options really live for anyone outside of like random workers who like create their own spreadsheets and things like that. But there's nothing like centralized from what folks have shared. And I'm curious if that's something like has come up or in talk conversations that have been brought up. Because I know that that's you know, even places in Multnomah County that where we are kind of hoarding the resources, it's now becoming overwhelming for folks because they're just not sure how to get into it. Like the homeless youth continuum, where I'm going this way, like it's can be really confusing. And then other parts and other regions of Oregon that are pretty resource desolate aren't there's like no place where they can kind of keep that information together and centralize. And so, yeah, I'm curious if there's conversations that have been brought up, or if there's anything that we can do, whether that's like a recommendation or a conversation about like, you know, obviously the big thing is we want more money because we want more resources, but I think something as simple as like an organized resource database or an organized like hotline number, like I don't know, something like that that would make this type of coordinated access specifically around housing a lot more streamlined and more accessible, not just to workers, but also to the youth themselves. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's challenging because we do have things like, 211 and provide some of those resources. So I haven't focused as much on that. That not being said that I don't want I don't agree that we should have a better way to access resources, but I haven't focused on that. But have I particularly have focused on things like, oh, let's collect at least our resources in one place for those workers. I haven't tried to tackle like, let's figure out, where the best place for the community resources are, because it sometimes feels like, recreating the wheel, because again, there is 211. This community has this community has that. And people don't consistently know where to find that, or say like, someone's like, I hate 211, or like that I don't find that helpful. And somebody else is like, oh, that works great for me. That's a, place to start. And so it feels very different in every community. So it isn't something that I've ever really tackled. I've really tried to tackle it more on a statewide, because I don't know how to dig in that many spaces at once. But absolutely, yeah, I mean, in no way are you saying something that's surprising to me, that like people struggle with that. Which is again why I like some of that stuff to be localized and be kind of, like I said, when I talked about like having a training that have like some of those people in the room and have different ways to remember that, I also think like talking about any of this requires talking to the community and figuring out what's there and what maybe needs to be enhanced, or what just needs to be publicized, and we're just not doing a good enough job there. It almost feels like every community almost needs to be surveyed for like, where do you get your resources? Where do you find those? What would be the first place you look, to know that we're not like, oh, we should create this, and then realizing, oh, okay, there's been those six efforts to do that, and we have it in different areas, and some people like this one and some people like this one, and how do we put it together, and how do we make sure it's advertised for people? So yeah, like I 100% agree that we need to do like, a better job of getting those out, but how exactly we do that, I think almost, it's very community to community is how we might do that for the localized stuff. I don't know who had their hand up first. So
go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, it's good to have you back again this month, Stacy. I was really excited after you presented last month. I've got a nonprofit that I'm working on getting started this year, and I've shared with Evelyn a little bit about it, but it's kind of focusing around foster youth adult readiness, both in training skills for workforce development, but also just life skills in general. And I was really excited when you were talking about the FYI certificates. Can you tell me a little bit more about how those are funded? Part of the reason I'm asking that question is part of the foster readiness program that I'm looking to start would also include transitional housing that I'm kind of working on developing, but would create that opportunity to give them a place to transition into that would be their own space before they go into their essentially first apartment on their own, just giving them that readiness.
Yeah, the ability to have those supports nearby is also fantastic. We know that that's an easier way sometimes for young people to access, is just that kind of continuity and that closeness. But foster youth independence vouchers. So foster youth independence vouchers remain about the same. They haven't changed anything. They clearly are continuing to prioritize that funding. So those are HUD funded vouchers. So they're like any other housing choice or Section 8 voucher. So meaning that a young person should pay about a third of their income. So, if they are if their income is $600, they should be paying $200 or less for their rent. They, you know, like any other voucher like that, they do have to stay within those rent reasonable standards. So if a young person is living in an area or wants to live in an area where the median rent is $1,500, they can't rent a place for $2,200. They're, you know, they need to rent it around $1,500. But, you know, so all the normal kind of limits, and, you know, same with, you know, like if they could income out at some point. Not usually, but it's sometimes people become over income for those vouchers, but they are definitely still available right now. The non-competitive notice of funding opportunity is a public housing authority. As long as they've done a memorandum of understanding with the child welfare, they can request anywhere from 1 to 25 at a time. And then once those are, you know, once they have filled up some of those, like they usually want it to go to about 90% of whatever they've asked for to be filled, they can ask for more. And so for right now, it's still a total of a maximum of 50 per year. But there are some communities that haven't done any of them. There are certainly communities that are working on them and are issuing vouchers. But the big thing for me is when we're talking to communities, to not add a lot of requirements to the voucher, because the way HUD wrote it is really broad, which is a good thing. They're saying young person has to be 18 through 24. So they need to have leased up before they turn 25. So that gives a nice age range. And then it's 3 years generally. In some situations, there could be 2 1-year extensions at the end of that, depending on if they offer some additional supports. But like 3 years is still a wonderful chunk of time for people to stabilize and get through that. Some of those young people are able to transition, like it depends on the community. Some are like, some maybe have a disability and might feel like they need a voucher permanently. They could get on the regular list when they're in this housing to see if they can qualify for a regular voucher by the end of that. The other criteria is that they have been in care. It doesn't say when. There's not you have to have aged out of care. Certainly that's kind of the target population, but it's not what it has to be. It really can be them have been in care. There's really, you know, I think it's a good thing because there's an implication that, you know, there's been some instability in your life and you may not have the highest level of family support if you have ended up in care at any point in your life. So it's lovely that they kind of keep it open, and then have been homeless or at risk of homelessness at 16 or later. Those are the 3 criteria. I don't believe in us like adding to our MOU. Some places have added, you know, other criteria to their MOU, but you don't have to. And you could certainly prioritize and say like, I'm gonna prioritize, you know, a certain population, but I don't think we should add anything to those MOUs. We should keep them as broad as possible so as many people can be served as possible. It really shouldn't be a ton of added work for a housing authority, because really they're doing the same thing that they would do with any other voucher. They're processing it, they're checking their you know, who they are, checking their income, checking their backup. They're doing a couple of those things, but that's what they would do with any other voucher. The added work is more for, you know, whatever community-based organization and child welfare that are supporting that young person. So providing those supportive services, helping them lease up, do those kind of things, you know, figuring out how we can do move-in costs, those kind of things are kind of the added to that voucher. So that's why it's a big commitment for child welfare to figure that out at times, because it says that, you know, that we're going to confirm that. So it doesn't say that we'll pay for it. It says we confirm that. So whether or not we could be paying for it, child welfare could be, or we could be connecting with somebody who gets funding through another source, because, you know, it's a population that multiple people are sometimes serving. So, but, you know, just wanting to make sure they're supported. The other pieces that sometimes people read in is it says offer those services. It doesn't say the young person has to accept. A young person should not be kicked out of housing because they decide, I want to take a break from this service or anything like that. Because, you know, we absolutely want that young person to accept the service, because most of them do. Like, I needed it at 22. Most people do. But it is offer. It is not like that they have to accept. So, you know, the goal is that we're there continuing to offer that service. and that a young person's going to accept it. But if they take a break from it, or if they do that, they're not in trouble for not accepting that service.
Thank you, Stacy. So Jesse, I saw your hand go down. If you still have a question, I wanted to give you a chance to ask it, but we are a little bit over time on this section, so I'd like to move over to Tristan. Stacy, just as a follow-up, I think what I've heard from a lot of the commissioners, and I've heard you respond to it, but if we're able to, get the agency to be able to collect kind of a statewide page and then supplement that with county-specific information, I think that'd be a great resource for everybody to just pull information from, even if it's not all applicable for everybody. But really appreciate you being here. I think the commission was very interested in what you had to offer, so very much appreciate it. Jesse, before I move on, did you have one other question?
No, my statement was when you're doing presentation, Stacy, in front of child welfare, I think from my experience around the supports that I've been involved with is having the resource developers there in the room, hearing the presentation, because they're the ones that are going to be supporting the resource and the caseworker to each other. And so having them in the room is the most critical point from my perspective. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. All right, so next we're going to transition to an ODHS child welfare update on the short session. And Tristan Fernandez, who we heard from during introductions, is here to give us a quick presentation. Welcome, Tristan. Tristan?
Sorry about that. 1 second. I've been sorry, trying to transfer over from some of the other things that are going on with fiscals, but yes, let me pull up my deck real quick. Have a quick presentation and conversation for us around legislative session. All right, hopefully everybody can see my screen. I'll kind of go quick because some of this information has evolved as session went on, but I do think a lot of it is still very relevant from when I was first asked to come and give you guys an update. So obviously session is already underway, and on February 4th, there was a revenue forecast. And I think the important thing about that revenue forecast is that it's still overall, I think most folks that are following things have probably heard or are aware that there's been a budget gap that the legislature has been trying to close. This last revenue forecast was more positive. However, there still remains an overall budget gap that the legislature is struggling through to try and close. However, I would say, at least from what we're hearing and where we are at ODHS Child Welfare, a lot of that does not seem to be stuff that's going to, there probably will be some cuts around the periphery, but they're not going to be major cuts to the child welfare program itself. The last thing to kind of just mention, obviously it's on the screen here, and I'll talk a little bit about why it's important to some of the bills that I'll talk about, is that adjournment is March 9th by the Constitution. So they cannot go further. If they need to, they have to schedule a special session and kind of bring all the legislation that is in progress back again, should they want to pass it. So these are just some of the key committees. The first two are the policy committees that essentially hear all child welfare pieces of legislation. I will say that two pieces of legislation I'll talk about are going to be being heard this Tuesday and Thursday in the Senate Human Services Committee. The Senate Human Services Committee. And then several other pieces of legislation that I'll talk about are in the Ways and Means Committee because they have fiscal notes. And a fiscal note essentially means there's some sort of cost, be it positive or negative, to the state. So even if something is going to save the state money, it has to go to the Ways and Means Committee. So one of the biggest things, as I talked about, has to do with the budget and rebalance, and really trying to get to close that gap. And the budget co-chairs did put out a full statement on how they're considering things and what they're thinking through. And one of the core things that they talked about is that in the 2025-2027 legislatively adopted budget, so the budget that already exists, they did already kind of remove and eliminate most of the vacant positions and any positions that were long-term vacancies and things like that, that those were all already swept. And that was a big savings. However, it does mean that they have a lot less option to kind of find those vacant positions and make savings there. They did identify 2 reserve accounts. They talked about the rainy day fund and the education stability fund as potential opportunities that they would use for short-term funding to kind of get through the current budget gap. They did also talk about revenues. I think one of the big things that I think a lot of folks may be aware of is that a lot of the budget gap that has come about has to do with the changes at the federal level from HR 1 and the way that Oregon's tax code is coupled with the federal tax code. And so there has been a conversation about restructuring the state's revenue and aligning that tax code differently. So those are the items that they've talked about. Obviously, we won't fully know until the co-chairs fully rebalance the budget and pass it through the full chamber. On that note, I'll just quickly cover the 2 major parties and the things that they've stated as that were their priorities going into session, and kind of have dictated a lot of what has been focused on. From the Democratic Party, the Senate Democrats did publish their priorities as guarding against federal overreach and keeping Oregonians safe. In that, they basically discussed safeguarding essential services like Medicaid, SNAP, and housing amid federal cuts, protecting democracy and elections from civil rights from federal interference, supporting refugee and immigrant communities, and defending access to reproductive health. Within that, they also did make a small note to children in care, children in state care, those with disabilities, safety, education, and community-based services for all of those groups. So while it's not I think the forefront, it is at least packaged within that piece for that stated agenda. The advancing affordability and prosperity, they did discuss K through 12 wraparound supports, overseeing reliable and diversified transportation system, and prioritizing wildfire mitigation and risk reduction for affected communities. And then standing with Oregon families, they discussed access to affordable housing, healthcare, wildfire risk reduction, and strengthening the Bureau of Labor and Industries with a prioritization on pregnant women, babies, toddlers, and protection for maternity centers and rural hospitals. So that's the agenda as the Senate Democrats put forward. I will say one of the major things that has been a focus from this has been that transportation piece and really trying to figure out a lot of the consternation around where and when the Department of Transportation funding. The Republicans did also publish their agenda. Theirs focused on affordability, public safety, and education. They cited specific bills that they hoped to pass. Under affordability, they're hoping to pass House Bill 4051, which creates deferred loans for first-time home buyers, a clean fuels program, the caps on Oregon's clean fuel programs, and eliminating the 22-cent per gallon tax at the tax pump. At the gas pump, a repeal of the First Nation law to allow striking workers to receive unemployment insurance. They also, under the public safety, their legislative agenda falls under House Bill 4051. They're looking for increases to increased penalties for swatting. That's the process of making a false report in attempt to getting police respond from a misdemeanor to, they want to increase the penalty for that from a misdemeanor to a felony. And they want to have They want to require search warrants within 72 hours when the underlying crime involves domestic violence or stalking when dealing with a communications company. So for those communications companies to turn around requests from law enforcement in 72 hours. The last one under education is 4133, which is specifically around workforce Pell Grants, so that students and families can choose schools. So school choice vouchers agenda. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes. I'll pause there for a second and see if there's anyone wants to talk and ask any questions kind of on those budget pieces. Otherwise, I'll dive into the pieces of legislation that are major impacting child welfare and that their kind of history, as well as how where they stand now as they've been amended and gone through a lot of this process with about 2 weeks left to go. So I know that'll be the trying to get to that piece, but pause here. I can't see. Are there hands? Okay. I'm not sure that I see anything, so I will continue on. So I think this entire group heard a lot about House Bill 3835 previously in the long session. That was the piece of legislation that came out of the System of Care Advisory Council and really represented essentially the culmination of the work there. And that piece of legislation has kind of come back. If you're familiar with what happened during long session during that House bill, a lot of the conversation got, I would say, punted is probably the wrong word, but it was a piece of legislation called 4086 was created that took a lot of that conversation and put it into two categories of a jurisdiction committee to evaluate child welfare's jurisdiction, and that a lot of that focused around the work that came out of 3835 in the SOCAC, identifying that that Oregon has a system in which minors can be founded for child abuse, and that essentially there's not, while that finding can then follow that youth throughout the rest of their lives, there's not a lot of, there's no real service directed or safety, there's no direct interaction when, if say a 10-year-old abuses their younger child, that can be founded for, that could be founded for abuse and could follow that child, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's a safety concern in the home from the parents. So items like that all were discussed in that jurisdiction committee, and I would say they came up with a piece of legislation that was 4059. And while there's a lot of different pieces to that, because a lot of the pieces from the 3835 were carried forward, I would say that the major conversation continues to be around threatened harm, and then the piece of legislation, and that what is not really has not really been discussed at length. So it seems that it is kind of coalesced around it, is that essentially the piece of legislation would be around 12 years old, is if, unless they're in a babysitting kind of capacity or having some sort of control, or I'm forgetting the exact language in the bill, but control or ownership over the child in lieu of a parenting situation. So that is that is kind of like the big piece of legislation that has been worked on by several committees, has come back over and over again throughout the last 3 or 4 years at this point, specifically around a lot of the inconsistencies, the definitional changes. This also has the component that I know folks have talked about in this space around the concerns that providers have had around them being founded for abuse in their capacity, in their professional capacity, and licensing action that could be taken against them, and the fear in that community. Those pieces are brought forward, essentially allowing OTIS, which is the Office of Training, Investigation, and Safety at ODHS, which is separate and apart from child welfare, but does do investigations of facilities and professional settings. that 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 there is an alternative that can be taken to kind of sanction the license and allow for certain exceptions where if the abuse would if a criteria for abuse would have just been an expired training or something of that nature, that they do not need to immediately suspend the license and take those actions that were kind of dictated in state law previously. So it does allow for some it allows for a lot of the common sense, and I know I've heard it called kind of the just culture mentality for what happens when providers are being founded and it's a professional licensing issue versus actual abuse occurring. So all of that is packaged into that big piece of legislation. That's why it's called an omnibus piece of legislation. And then I need to flip over to that other one you see there, Senate Bill 1534 is a competing piece of legislation coming from the Senate Human Services Committee. And I would say it largely takes a different interpretation of those council's recommendations and attaches to them changes to the definition of a child in care, and I would say really expands that definition. So, in one piece of legislation, there's a lot of attention being placed towards being responsive to the fear of findings in that child in care definition and the lack of providers and the community providers that have said that one of the reasons that we're losing providers and that they're having trouble with the workforce has to do with that punitive action. That this piece of legislation, 1534, retains the existing kind of status quo around a lot of that with some minor exceptions, and those exceptions are for when a child is on a in-home service plan for the parent, and it does give it does give Otis the opportunity to take different action for a licensing action in a similar way to 4059. However, the big change all surrounds the child in care standards, which would then be applied to anyone that is a service provider providing care to a child. So when what we're talking about when I say that is anyone that is on an in-home plan that has that may be helping the family. So be it tribal members, grandparents, and things like that are around that family. Only the parent is exempt from the child in care definition. So everyone else serving that child will be held to the existing higher standard for essentially that has been previously largely reserved for DHS employees, staff at facilities, and things like that for what is a child in care. That was a lot of information. There are two major pieces of legislation with huge sweeping changes across both. They are both still in progress. One is in the Ways and Means Committee because, like I talked about, it has a fiscal note. That is 1534. 4059 is in the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee is essentially a committee that allows for continuous work on a piece of legislation past the deadlines. So it's significant because the legislature has essentially identified this as a piece of legislation that they want to keep working on, even if those deadlines have passed. And so it signals a what I would call an importance to the policy that they're trying to find a path forward, even though I would say there are folks on both sides of both pieces of legislation. Neither has just unanimous support from community providers, et cetera, and both have oppositional testimony and supportive testimony from a wide variety of folks. And so there's been a lot of testimony given on both pieces of legislation. I'll pause there because I know that one's big, and let me see if I can get the chat up. All right. No, I'm not seeing anything, but pause me, anybody, if Come off mute if I'm wrong. The next pieces of legislation that I do think are important, they're just not as huge and sweeping as those other pieces of legislation, is Senate Bill 875 and Senate Bill 736 from the last long session that did not pass. Both have essentially come back in the form of 1533. Expansion around the the child and care definitions. There has been discussion, and I think I've seen amendments that took it out and put it back in. But at least as of right now, that piece of legislation is still going forward, taking one of the major pieces from those omnibuses and then adding it to these other two pieces of legislation, which one was essentially of elevating one the parts that don't have to do with the child and care, elevates the foster care Bill of Rights, several of the rights that are found in the foster care Bill of Rights, to statutory level, and some new rights that were not. And then the other piece specifies that when a CPS investigation is starting, that the CPS investigator make sure to make it clear that they're not a lawyer and that they can't provide legal advice to the individual that's being investigated. ODHS took action in the interim to basically put these things into rule and policy already. So those two pieces, while they're important to call out and say that they're in there, several of the items that were in the foster care foster Bill of Rights that were being elevated in rules by process already. And same with the notification to parents was actually already distributed and has been updated, and essentially the documents that a parent gets when they first when there's kind of that first contact.
Hey, Tristan.
Yeah.
Just the bill that ended up coming out of the Senate committee, it was pretty clean on just the Bill of Rights and Sibling Bill of Rights.
Oh,
So,
interesting. Yeah.
It keeps changing for sure.
Amendments keep coming.
Yeah.
And so then
For this group, I just wanted to say a couple things that we couldn't put in rule because they're not under our DHS's authority, is that every child will have a right to an attorney, which will be statutory. And I think most kids do have attorneys, but now it will be a statutory right. And also a right when interviewed by law enforcement regarding a investigation, they have a right to have their attorney present or another representative. So those two things will be put into statute. Sorry, Tristan, for interrupting. I just know it's hard to keep up with all the
super
amendments.
helpful. That's super helpful. So those are kind of the big bills, big pieces of legislation that are still alive, moving through the process. There will be a hearing on Tuesday and Thursday this week for I gotta make sure I get the numbers right. 1532 and 1533, I believe, are the two that have hearings this week. And I think looping back to kind of that first thing I talked about when I talked about the constitutional sine die, which is the last when they have to adjourn, that's basically 2 weeks away. So being fully honest with this group and just being transparent, a lot of these have a lot of steps to get through in a very short amount of time. So it is entirely possible that these conversations just continue and continue. So we're unclear. Obviously, we are, as an agency, really advocating for those pieces of legislation that came out of the committees, that the System of Care Advisory, the legacy of the System of Care Advisory Council, and then what then became the 4086 committee and those recommendations. So I think it's fair to say that, and I know that the governor's office has come out in support of that 4059. And then I would just say that the competing bills are also still alive and have their own supporters and, are still in progress. So I know there have been attempts to kind of come to a compromise or an agreement, but to my knowledge, I think from what I've heard, the policy differences between the two remain, and so there may not. I think. I guess what am I trying to say? That the policy, the difference between the two policies are not really not reconcilable because they're oppositional at their base. So depending on which way the legislature chooses to go, it's kind of before them now.
Thank you, Tristan.
Sorry, yeah, I tried to keep it fast, but a lot.
we're right about the end of the time of your section, but I want to make sure if anybody has any questions, they have time as well.
Yes, Dean, I do have a question, and that's just about like how many of these things that are being passed and stuff like that. Well, this is more of like a question regarding like how the department does bookkeeping and stuff like that, and how it relates to these bills. Because I know that like a lot of policies that pass and stuff like that and get instituted in code and stuff like that, they can be, it's stored differently depending on like if it's a statute on versus like just a department policy and stuff like that. So what's the current status of like some of those things since you already discussed about how some of those things are already occurring, but that the bill will make them statutes and stuff like that instead of just rules. Yep. And is there anything that would be good for like a preservation of those? I know that sounds like a very boring nerd, technical question, but making sure that these rules are preserved and stuff like that, I think it's important, and to make sure they're properly written down and recorded. Else we don't want a Library of Alexandria situation if our computers go out.
Yes. So all rules have to go through a RAC process, which is the Rule Advisory Committee process, which is all public. But I think also what might be helpful for you is I'm going to try and find the link real quick and drop it in the chat. DHS does a end of session report every year or every session. So we record and put out everything that passed and things that we tracked that maybe didn't pass. So, and that can, for some of those things that didn't pass, we may still be doing rules and things like that. So they'll be on there. So I'll get you that link. I'll drop it in the chat. The flip side of that is, yes, all rules are publicly posted. There's a rules advisory committee for every single one. Every single one can have, public can view those and be a part of those. They may not be able to be part of the RAC because the Rules Advisory Committee may not, you can always volunteer to be a part of them, but not, while every single public member can attend a Rules Advisory Committee, there will always be a smaller group that is actually like voting on the rule ultimately, if that makes sense. And so that's just kind of how the RAC process works in general. But I will drop in the chat both the rules calendars and where all the rules and public meetings are posted. And then I'll also find you the link for the end of session, where the end of session reports get posted for DHS. I do believe most agencies do some form of a end of session report, but I can't 100% say that every single agency does. I just know that at least I've worked at OHA and DHS, and both of those agencies do. Right. So I'll drop those in the chat because I think OHAs will also be relevant to you guys, as there is a decent amount of behavioral health pieces of legislation that impact especially our older youth.
Thank you, Tristan. So as Tristan was presenting, Dean, as you all saw, hopped on, so we do have quorum. So if we can jump back to the very beginning of the agenda real quick, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes from January.
Aye.
Was that Dean that moved for it? Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor of approving the January meeting minutes, say aye or raise your hand. And any opposition?
Aye.
Okay, so we'll pass the approval of the January meeting minutes, and we'll now move to the section that's for member comments, concerns, or topics to address. I just have one to bring up shortly before the meeting. Alex Ireland, Alex Island, sent an email. She's withdrawing or resigning as a commissioner. So currently we have 8 seated commissioners. We have 4, now 5 vacant seats. We are scheduled to lose 2 people in June, although Judge Chico, I understand that you're likely asking to be renominated.
So I'm willing to be renominated. I talked to the Chief Justice, and she is figuring out if she wants me to do this or something else. But I'll get you some, Judge.
Perfect. And then Pamela is coming off the commission in June. So currently we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 vacancies heading into June, which would take us below quorum. We have submitted 3 new names for the governor's office, and then in my discussions with Ellen, it sounds like we've got a few more people that have applied through the pipeline. So we'll try to get them vetted and get them sent off to the governor's office. I am unsure when the Senate confirmation is. I need to follow up on that, but with it being a
I think
short
it's
session,
April. I
it's
believe
in
it's
April.
April. Yeah.
Okay, so it's after the session.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So hopefully we can get some new names. I don't know when the deadline is. We'll figure that out. But if we're able to get all 3 confirmed, we'll still have quorum. So no real pressing there, but we'd like to get to a full commission. So if people have, if you can reach out to people that I know that the 3 that are coming that we proposed, Matt Miller's one of them. We have somebody also from Portland who's a pediatrician and somebody from Lane County who's a CASA. But again, that's coming from our 3 big counties. And so if anybody knows anybody in rural areas that would be interested, that'd be great. And as always, we're looking for a tribal representative to join our commission. So really we do outreach on here. People can apply, do a cold application with us. But if you know people who have lived experience that may be in a rural area, it's certainly worthwhile to reach out to them and get them in the pipeline. Does anybody else have any other commissioner updates?
Should we put them in touch with Ellen?
Ellen, is that the best route, or do you want to put them in touch
If
with
they have
Malik?
any trouble with Workday, they can go onto Workday. But if they have, sometimes people have trouble with the links. But generally, you can go into boards and commissions looking for, and if you'd like, I can send that out to everybody so that everybody on the commission has that in your email. If you'd like that, I'll just send that out a little later. And that way you can cut and paste it into an email, and it won't be in the chat here, so you won't have to grab it from there.
I also want to add just, a little message out to the commissioners that, I understand that with the low number of commissioners we have right now, it's requiring extra work from each of us to fully staff this commission and to do the subcommittees. And so I really do appreciate everybody going above and beyond as we're waiting, to kind of fill up our commission back up. With that said, if anybody has concerns or are feeling, that you're not being heard on this commission, please do reach out to Malik or I or Ellen and have a conversation with us. And, I think it's always our goal to make sure you're heard, and that, you feel like you're valued in this commission, because you all are. But if you're feeling like you need to get off the commission, please do give us a call, have a chat about it. I think we've all had some frustrations, but we do a lot of good work here, and I think it's important. And if we lose another commissioner before June, we're going to really struggle for quorum. So, yeah, that's all I got on that. Any other commissioners have any comments that they'd like to make?
Really good meeting, Casey. I appreciate you keeping everything on time.
Yeah, Casey, I gotta ask, can you send the continued invites of this meeting to my Jesse Powell at MorsonKids.com or Morson?
That'd be for Ellen, but Ellen, do you got that email address?
Yes, yeah, I do. I have that, and that's where they have gone, but I'm going to double check. Your name is on all of those invitations, but you can call me offline. We can make sure that you've got every one of them for the rest of the year.
It was .org though, not .com, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you. And it shows that it's going to the messy Jesse Powell.
Does it? Oh, it's going over there.
So
Okay.
and that's why I didn't have it on my calendar for today because I went to my personal email and not my work email.
Yeah,
So,
no problem. I'll get it. I'll go back and make sure that gets corrected.
okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, not a major thing, but I will be like reaching out to just so you guys know, I will be reaching out to like more of you guys to have conversations, network, get some issue, stuff like that, and see what we can do. So yeah, just standard government politicking, whatever, networking.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll move to the last section, public comment. So this section's designed for anybody who's not a commissioner to make a comment if you have something to add. We'll open that up now.
I just wanted to thank you all for all that you do. Okay, I know it's been a real trying time here in Oregon and everything that we've went through, and we'll get through it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for attending, Alicia. These
You're
meetings are, of
welcome. I'll
course,
continue to
open
be
to the
here, and then
public. So
I have to wait till some stuff gets finished. I'm going to do CASA to make sure that things like this don't happen again to children. My story's a little different because I was out of state, so as a grandparent, I had to become a foster care parent, and they took them from me after I went through everything. It's all been sent. I guess I just can't see or know where my grandchildren are until my daughter dies, which is really sad. So, and the charges were unfounded. So I was really glad to hear that they've upped that to a felony, because what some person said and did was unfounded. And the way that, as a grandparent, I have no rights in this state. So my huge thing is to be able to, get us some rights when we go to take our grandkids and they're signed off to us. My daughter severed her rights, and then for them to come in and take them from me when I worked for the airline. And, it was just the most crazy thing. And it's taken me a long time to have the words for it. And to see change in our state would be the most magical thing ever, because that's all I came home to do. And I've been tortured here. I've been through more jobs than I have in my whole entire life. So, yeah, I've stalked, it's been crazy. But I believe in us, and this is my home and where I was born and raised, and my children too. And we'll all get through it, and we'll get this corrected and make sure that this never happens to another family in our state again. And thank you guys for volunteering your time to do the commission. I do appreciate it.
Yeah. Alicia, I'm not going to give you legal advice right now, but I do think grandparents have some rights in Oregon, and potentially there's somebody on this commission that you could reach out to be directed to some resources.
Yeah, I know things are changing. I came on here about a year ago. And I also I work for the Portland Trailblazers. We have some funds that are coming available with the sale of the team. So I'm just trying to look at what I can do and where it's needed and how I can, because my dream is to, do something to help these children and to see what we need and help us, the state, and, through whatever I can do to help get the resources. And the transition part, my grandkids are going to be coming to the transition stage here. They were born in 2013. So, to see that, I think it's something that really needs to be supported through them, and I have some ideas about it. So I will try to get a hold of Stacy too and talk to her a little bit about it. It seems like she's very knowledgeable on it.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you for being here.
You're
Tristan,
welcome.
you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to try and answer the judge's prior question around for the older youth and support in the legislature. Just neutrally, I'm going to say that the last investment in that area was the ILP. There were ILP rates increased in 2020 in the last biennium budget, but prior to that, it looks like it goes back at least to 2019. So I can't speak to anything prior to that, but I would say, yeah, it's been some time, and I know that rate was not I think it was not the full rate that the ILP folks wanted, but just trying to neutrally answer that question for you.
Okay. All right. Well, seeing no other public comment, we are at 12:58, and we'll go ahead and move to adjourn here at 12:58. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We are set for next month. I don't have the date off of it. Ellen, do we know what date? I'm looking at the calendar.
16th.
We're doing it March 16th. Is that what I heard?
I believe so.
It is. We're back on the normal because February and January thrown off a little bit by the holidays, the Monday holidays. So we're back to the 16th in March.
Okay, third Monday, right?
Yep.
So, okay, so we'll be back on the 16th of March, 11:30 in the morning. And appreciate everybody. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next month.
Have a good one.
Thank you.